Paul Finebaum of ESPN says these two games are the most important for the Oklahoma Sooners. What are they? Coming up next on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, so hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Shout out to all the everydayers that are making Locked On Sooners their first listen every single day. He's Jay Smith. Follow him on Twitter at Unfair Sports. I'm John Williams. Follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. And the top story today, Paul Finebaum, ESPN, talking with Greg McElroy, Cole Kubelik of the SEC fame, and mentioned two games for the Oklahoma Sooners that were critical and key to their success in 2024. It's their opener against the Tennessee Volunteers, the return of Josh Heupel, and it's their home finale against the Alabama Crimson Tide in November. So, Jay, what do you make of Paul Finebaum's choices there?
So the Tennessee one is the logical choice, right? It's the first game in the SEC. It's the one that probably any and everybody would say that's the one that determines what Oklahoma is going into the SEC. And, you know, rightfully so, being it's the first one, even though we've played Tennessee in the past, we've seen them before in Norman, and we've been to Knoxville. So it's not like it's the first time Oklahoma's seen Tennessee, but it is the one that introduces them to the SEC, I guess. And then Alabama was an interesting one, being as the home finale. I totally get the choice of that one because Kalen DeBoer has done a fantastic job at every place that he's been. I mean, he's won everywhere that he has coached. I mean, heck, he took Washington to the national championship, and that was kind of a surpriser, right? He walks in and gets him to winning records and goes that far. So I get where, and in that battle is between Kalen DeBoer as an offensive-minded guy versus Brent Venables, a defensive-minded guy. So it made sense that he picked those two, especially with Josh Heupel making his return back to Norman.
Yeah, I think that Tennessee game is critical for Oklahoma to get off to a fast start in SEC play. You're welcoming a quarterback who's also in his first season as a starter in Nico Iamaleava. You've got to make life very difficult for him in that game. You cannot let him get off to a hot start. He's very talented, very capable of making your life miserable as a defense if you're not able to contain his athleticism and if you're not able to confuse him in the passing game. So I think that one, to me, it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a no-brainer, and we'll discuss why it's one of our key games coming up here in a second. Alabama, I totally get it. It's Alabama. It's the brand. As much as it is Kalen DeBoer, Alabama is the team of the last 2 decades in college football. Nick Saban, no Nick Saban, it's still Alabama. And that's the team that's going to be rolling into Gaylord Family Oklahoma Memorial Stadium late in the season with big-time playoff implications on the line. That's going to be a game that will matter at the end of the season. No matter what happens in the first couple months of the season, for Alabama and for Oklahoma, that game is going to have significant implications to the postseason. And if you're Oklahoma, that's going to be one of those that, again, you've been so good at home. Owen Field has been a home field advantage for you for so long. Now it's time to really put that to the test and put that in effect when you welcome Alabama. So, Jay, let's go through our key games and our games that we find to be the most important for the Oklahoma Sooners. I'm going to let you go ahead and go first here. Jay, you and I have very similar ones. We both hit on Tennessee, but talk about Auburn here. Talk about why this one is a key game for the Oklahoma Sooners in 2024.
Well, with Auburn, they'll be the first road game for Oklahoma in the SEC. Of course, first off, the second thing, though, is Auburn hosts like 87,000 fans, right? That'll be probably one of the largest road games that Oklahoma's seen since Texas A&M left the Big 12 And a conference game, that is, right? Nebraska, they hold 80-something thousand up there, and we was up there a couple of years ago. So, that's a big hostile environment. But to be able to start seeing this, as we talked about on yesterday's show, seeing this week after week, every time you go on the road, you're going to a massive crowd. That's where you're going to be able to cut your teeth and show that you are a team that can definitely compete with the big boys of this conference. So you've got that one with Auburn, and then you wrap it up, to me, LSU. Now, it's not even dependent on if LSU's good or not. There's still 100,000 fans in Death Valley, most likely at night, and it's going to be Thanksgiving weekend. That game is going to be huge, and it's no matter what, it's going to have implications on who makes moves in the SEC. So I'm believing that those 3 games, it's Tennessee, Auburn, and LSU, are the 3 key games that really are going to determine some stuff for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I want to touch on this one about Auburn. I mean, Auburn is a team that is a lot better than what their record indicated from a year ago. I mean, this was a team that nearly beat Alabama. It took the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys on 4th and forever by Jalen Milroe to beat the Tigers and extend their hopes at winning a national championship at the end of that season in the Iron Bowl. This was a team that played Georgia really, really close as well. So Hugh Freeze has got this program on the rise, heading in a really, really nice trajectory. They're recruiting really, really well. And that's, again, Oklahoma's first true road trip. Totally with you on that one. And then, man, LSU, obviously, like our guy Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC talked about how that could very much be a playoff play-in game at the end of the season. Oklahoma, both of those teams could be sitting there looking for either their 9th or 10th win, and they could be sitting there with pretty similar records, and the winner goes on to the playoff and the loser goes home. So I think that one makes a lot of sense. And we both have those. We both have Tennessee. We both have LSU. Alabama sits there for me again as a key game. I agree with Paul Finebaum on that front because, again, it's Alabama. This is the game that you were excited to get on your schedule when that first group of conference opponents was released last fall. And again, Nick Saban retiring kind of took a little bit of the luster out of it. But, man, Kalen DeBoer is a really, really good head coach. The guy has not had the down seasons as a head coach. He's not had the growing pains. He's not had these big years where he's had a losing season. I mean, he's been great everywhere. And so this is going to be a guy that by the time you get to November, he's going to have that team humming. Who knows what the first part of the season is going to look like for the Crimson Tide and what their record's going to be. But by the time you get to November, that team's going to be really, really good. And I know a lot of people aren't necessarily sold on Jalen Milroe as a quarterback, but he's just kind of got that it factor, and he's just kind of a gamer, right? I mean, he may not be the toolsiest quarterback in the league, in the nation, but he's just a guy that he just goes wins, right? Kind of reminds you a little bit of a Jalen Hurts, a dude that just knows how to win football games. And so that is going to be a big time test for the Oklahoma Sooners and their defense. Again, considering a dual threat quarterback and what Oklahoma's dealt with in years past, even under Brent Venables, and they've had struggles against dual threat quarterbacks. That's going to be a huge, huge contest for them. But that, again, that LSU one, I think it makes a lot of sense for a key critical game. What about like a team like Ole Miss? I mean, I think that's a game that everybody's excited about, but it may not be creating as much buzz as some of these others on the schedule.
Yeah, that one game is you're traveling to Oxford and you're playing against Lane Kiffin as well as Pete Golding, who are both people that were disciples underneath Nick Saban at one point in their career. And I mean, they finished last year with 11-2 record, right? So they have a very favorable schedule, and just the way that Lane Kiffin does things, they brought in a lot of players from the portal, so they've almost borderline refreshed while still having Jackson Dart as their starting quarterback. And so, to me, Ole Miss is kind of under the radar again this year. The schedule's very favorable. I can see them going back and winning double-digit games this season. And when Oklahoma goes there, the key thing is can they stop Lane Kiffin and can they put up numbers on Pete Golding? And that's where the challenge is going to come in. But around that time, we'll have a good idea of what Oklahoma is, what exactly that team is, right? That's kind of why I picked Tennessee as well as Auburn. It's because it's the first home and the first road games. And that's going to be the ones to tell us, okay, Oklahoma has a chance, or it's going to be like, Yeah, we may have to go ahead and prepare ourselves for next season. Hopefully we can win at least 8 games after that.
Yeah, and obviously Texas is going to be a key game every single season. That is without saying. I don't think anybody has to mention that one. It's obvious that Texas is a critical game, regardless of what your aspirations or goals are that year. You got to go beat Texas. And nobody's talking about Mizzou because Mizzou.
I mean, everybody's trying to create the rivalry out of that. We talked about that in the green room a little bit, and it cracks me up because, I mean, we're 12-2 against Missouri since like the 90s or whatnot. We like own a record of like 60 something wins to barely 20 wins or something like that. Yeah. Why do we talk about Missouri, right? I know Missouri wants to pick a fight with somebody because they just desperately want to have themselves a rival, but it seems like Arkansas is like, we don't even want to try to beat you because Arkansas has been up and down so bad. I mean, they kind of had the border war with Kansas, but I mean, Kansas is finally getting, it's like their rivals are teams that really aren't very good for the most part. Now that Kansas is stepping up their game, could be a potential for there, but they really want us to be their rival, and we're the team that's kind of knocked them off at all their best turns. So, we're not concerned about that game. We'll see what they look like because, remember, they lost their defensive coordinator. They've also lost another defensive coach. And so, because of that, they had to do a lot of changes there. The question is, how do they look now with all these new staffers on their team? Does that help them? Because their DC going to LSU was considered a big loss. He did a really good job last year of making that defense what it is. I don't know if losing your defensive line coach and your defensive coordinator is going to be a good thing for them this coming season.
Mizzou is like the 10th ranked fighter in the world that's chirping at the champ, just chirping, constantly chirping just to get himself some notoriety, get himself some publicity, and try to publicize himself into a title fight. A guy that may not have earned it, but finally the champ's like, you know what? Fine. Let's just go do this. And that's kind of what Mizzou is at this point. It's going to be fun though when Oklahoma goes to Columbia. I know they're going to be geeked up for it, and Oklahoma fans making the trip are going to be excited to see what transpires on that day. Josh Pate says there's no gap between Oklahoma and Texas. Coming up next on Locked On Sooners. Locked On Sooners is brought to you by Gametime. If you're looking for last-minute tickets and the lowest prices on Major League Baseball tickets, go to Gametime. It makes it easier and faster to get tickets through the Gametime app. You can go download the app in your App Store or Google Play Store, and the closer you get to first pitch, the prices go down with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. But man, there's so many great things going on around the Oklahoma City area as well. If you want to go check out the Oklahoma City Dodgers this 4th of July weekend, 5th, 6th, and 7th, they're welcoming the Las Vegas Aviators. $17 tickets. You want to go see Jersey Boys? You can get in on the action over at Gametime as well. Again, the best place for last-minute tickets and the lowest prices guaranteed. They've got the all-in inclusive pricing, so you know what you're going to get up front. No surprise fees at checkout. And again, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets or tickets to your favorite shows or comedy shows as well. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Are you watching ESPN or Fox Sports all day and have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Well, check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming show that's now available for you every day on YouTube, as well as the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Josh Pate, 247 Sports, Late Kick Show, came out and basically fought against some of the narratives about Oklahoma and Texas. As we go into the SEC, everybody is just gassing up Texas, all gas, no brakes. It's the hype machine is in full effect. It's been well oiled. It's been tuned up. And with a few months still until the start of the 2024 season, that hype train is only going to pick up steam as well as we get closer to week 1. But Josh Pate came out and said, hey, maybe tap the brakes a little bit on this supposed gap between the Oklahoma Sooners and the Texas Longhorns on a show on Monday. He says, I think there are 3 things at play. There's bias towards Texas that I think is undeniable. Number 2, I think there's a lot of recency bias. And what they do is they don't think back to the Red River Shootout last year. If they did that, they'd know Oklahoma won that game. He goes on to say, more recent than that, we saw Texas make the playoff. Finally, Texas made some folks look smart, and they love them for it. Oklahoma won double-digit games last year as well, and they were a couple of one-possession losses that stood between them and maybe doing a whole lot more than just a nice, solid bowl game. He goes on to say, for some reason, the stink of Brent Venables' first year and his record being 6-7 still lingers much more so than Sark going 5-7 in his first year. That was a year prior to Brent Venables' first year, but also Texas has a playoff appearance, whether it should or not, it just washes everyone's memory clean, because Oklahoma had a nice year last year, wasn't a playoff appearance though. So Jay, I'm going to turn it to you. Josh Pate, I mean, the man knows his college football, and I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to argue with him, but I think he makes a lot of really salient points here. The number one being, I really think the media has just been waiting for a day like today, an offseason like this offseason, to fuel the Texas hype machine.
Yeah, it's like the conversations you have with like the Dallas Cowboys as well as the Los Angeles Lakers, you know, and the New York Knicks. You know, it's your big brand, the big program that will lead to everybody clicking on it, right? Everybody's going to get mad hearing about, you know, anybody that doesn't talk up Texas, right? I think they're haters and all of that, whatever. Texas has been the biggest unachieving program in college football in the last 25 years, right? Sure, they had the most recent national championship comparison to Oklahoma, but, I mean, they don't have the conference titles to show that they should have, right? You know, Mac Brown was out there winning 10 games, you know, on a consistent basis, and he still could not get past Oklahoma. Like, it was like Bob Stoops was his kryptonite, right? Kind of like we felt like Gary Patterson was Bob Stoops' kryptonite in a way, but I digress on that. Texas has had everything placed in front of them to be the best team almost ever, right? They've always had it, and it just seems like the hires never work out. The coaching, they have to constantly change coaches. It feels like the boosters feel the need to have their hands in the cookie jar a little too much, and it always derails any good momentum that they have. So we'll see what they look like here going into the SEC, but Pate makes the great point. Oklahoma's 11-4 against them in the last 15 matchups, 7-3 in the last 10. What's even funnier is before last year's game, they were still 7-3 in the last 10 matchups against Texas. And before that one, before that loss, they were still 7-3 in the last 10 matches. It's always a consistency when it comes to Oklahoma winning 4 and 5 games in a row against them. And so I know that nobody wants to give Brent Venables props for what happened in the Bob Stoops era or even the Lincoln Riley era. I understand that. But when you go look at the recruiting, which Pate showed on his show, he pointed out, look at the comparisons of recruiting. It's not that big of a difference. Texas maybe at 3, Oklahoma at 6. Sure, but Oklahoma's averaging roughly the 5th rate average class every year since Brent Venables has been here. So recruiting hasn't fell off. Blue chip rate hasn't fallen off. It's done nothing but increase. So obviously there's an opportunity. The bigger thing here, and this is the only thing I can give props to anyone questioning, is we've got to make sure that Oklahoma executes. And quite frankly, last year showed me that it can. They just need everybody in place. Feels like we're there.
Yeah, and what we saw in the Red River rivalry game last year was a team that, man, they brought the fire, they brought the energy. I mean, from Jaleel Farouk standing there, welcoming the Texas Longhorns onto the field, kind of as this solo character in the epic battle scene. You know, he was Aragorn charging, you know, the orcs and Saruman's army. Like he was, or Sauron's army, before all the Lord of the Rings guys get me in the comment section to make sure we get this right. Sauron's army at the gates, you know, of Mount Doom. I'm trying to remember my Lord of the Rings lore. It's been a minute since I've watched Return of the King. But I mean, yeah, Jalil Farouk kind of bringing that energy, and then the defense doing what it did, the goal line stand. I feel like that game, even though Oklahoma lost 2 games after that, that game was the turning point in, okay, this is no longer a team trying to distance itself from the Lincoln Riley era. This is Brent Venables' program, and this is what we're going to expect from Brent Venables' teams moving forward. The clutch defensive plays, coming up big in crunch time in the fourth quarter. I mean, all of it carrying over, just the energy from snap one to the end of the game was just phenomenal. And I think as they build the depth and as that talent increases, as we've seen, and you pointed out just a second ago, the blue chip rate has only gone up in Brent Venables' tenure. We're going to start to see, okay, Oklahoma is as good, if not better than Texas, still on a regular basis.
Yeah, Jalil Farouk coming out there like Jon Snow on in the big battle against all of the dead. Yeah, we have shown that if there's a game that we care the most about, just like anybody should be, is that rivalry against Texas, right? And I do appreciate the fact that both programs have decided that they want to make sure they keep that together as much as possible. Hence why both teams moving to the SEC together. I remember back when expansion and conference realignment was really in the initial conversation, there was the looks of Oklahoma and Texas going to the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 at the time, and they missed out on a massive opportunity there. But we care about that game. I mean, there was the article that came out that the players were doing 49, medicine ball sit-ups before the game, right? Before they started all their workouts, and they did it at 49 because of the 49-0 loss to Texas. They really wanted to make sure that they won that game. And so I don't see why anybody would question that intensity for not only Texas, but everybody else for the rest of the season, especially now that we're going into our 3rd season with Brent Venables, and a lot of these defenders, these key ones, are going into the 3rd year in this system, which is going to be a dramatic difference, as he has shown and proven everywhere he's been. By the 3rd season, those defenses are always stout.
Yeah, we're expecting it to take another step from being the 49th ranked scoring defense to probably getting into the top 25 in 2024. The Oklahoma Sooners are closing in potentially on a blue chip linebacker in the 2025 recruiting class. Who is it and what does he bring to the table? We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. The Oklahoma Sooners are number 5 right now in the 25 recruiting rankings, according to 247 Sports, sitting really, really pretty with 20 commitments, but look to be closing in on several more. They got a couple decision dates that they'll be eagerly awaiting this week. But Christian Jones, a linebacker out of Omaha, Nebraska, somebody who Nebraska is heavily favored to earn a commitment from. Well, Parker Thune of OUInsider at Rivals issued a Rivals FutureCast favoring the Sooners in that recruitment. Now, this is going to be one of those recruitments to watch, because anytime that you are going into a state like Nebraska and trying to pull a player away who has probably grown up watching the Cornhuskers. Now, Nebraska in his lifetime hasn't been very good, but there's at least the history there with Nebraska, and probably a big draw to Memorial Stadium for one Christian Jones, but a legit blue chip prospect, someone who's viewed very highly according to Rivals and ESPN. But this could be a big time commitment if Oklahoma is able to win it.
Yeah, Christian comes in here as the number 1 player out of the state of Nebraska too. That's a pretty huge deal. And as you mentioned, Nebraska may not have been good with him growing up. I mean, technically they haven't been good in the last 20 years, but the good thing for Nebraska is that with Matt Rhule coming in there, they're starting to show some competency, and they're starting to show that they can get back to the old days of Nebraska potentially. He's recruiting very well, and adding those specific teams that they've added into the Big Ten is going to do nothing but help him on the recruiting trails, trying to get more of a national piece, right? Well, for us, we have a thing for Nebraska players also, right? Caden Helms, you got Kate McIntyre. We kind of like going after guys up there in that state, especially some of the top ones. We have a tendency of pulling them in. But Christian comes in there at 6'2 and a half, roughly 6'3", 215. Kind of reminds you of another Danny Stutzman, right? The way he moves and the way he commands things at the line of scrimmage, the way he pays attention and calls out stuff. Yeah, there's a good chance for Oklahoma to snatch away the best player in the state. My favorite part about him too is, and he's basically adding to the checking all the checklist of what Oklahoma looks for in a player, because he's a track athlete as well. Ran a 11.8 in 100. He's ran sub 11s in the 100 through his sophomore year. So what Oklahoma likes to do is get dudes that are fast, dudes that are smart, and dudes that like to hit. And I promise you, when you watch the film, Christian Jones likes to hit.
Now, he's got a really, really nice, intriguing offer sheet. Obviously, Oklahoma, Nebraska, but also Auburn, USC, Iowa, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Michigan State, Minnesota, Missouri, Notre Dame, Penn State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Washington, Wisconsin. That's a group of teams I would classify as like tough, tough, you know, lunch pail type teams, right? The Minnesotas, the Penn States, you know, the Michigan States, Iowas, you know, these are Texas A&M and Mike Elko. Like, these are the teams that are going to bring their lunch pail. They're going to work and they're going to grind. And that just sounds like a Brent Venables type of player as well. I think this is a really key recruitment. Oklahoma only took one linebacker in the 2024 cycle in James Nesta, a guy who's going to double up as a baseball player as well. So you're a little bit light at linebacker in the future. I mean, that 2023 class was great. It's deep with, you know, Lewis Carter and Samuel Omasigo and Phil Picciotti. The 2022 guys, Jaron Kanik and Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie are still around, probably going to be around for at least another year or two. But you got to start landing some linebacker commitments as well so that you can add to that depth. I mean, we really, really like the depth chart that they've got at linebacker, but you don't want to find yourself in a position like you were in 2022, where your three starters are playing nearly 1,000 snaps each. And by the end of the season, you can tell West Virginia game that those guys are just getting worn down. No, you gotta make sure you have depth so that you can keep your stars fresh and keep them humming, you know, because you're going to face teams eventually like a Mississippi State, who's going to want to go up tempo and want to keep you on the field as much as possible. And you don't want to have your linebackers gassing out in the third quarter with another 15 minutes to play after that.
Yeah, you got to have that, as we call it, competitive depth, right? You need to have those additional players to be able to rotate in on a regular basis. And you hit the nail on the head. We're starting to, even though we're anticipating keeping, you know, you'll have your Kanik, you'll have your Kobe McKenzie and your Kip Lewis in for next season. But after that, you're going to start to thin up. Now, the good thing about this class is, I would say we probably need at least 3 linebackers personally. That's always been my calling on this one. They may only go ahead 2. You'll get Christian Jones, and then the athlete Marcus James from Carl Albert will be playing linebacker as well, 6'3", 220-pounder. So you'll have 2 really big linebackers that's potentially for this class. I think a third would be great to have just in case, you know, because as we're getting a few years down the line, you're going to want to make sure you have some additional guys in 2028 that, you know, can help. But granted, if the 2026 class is very fruitful at the linebacker position, you may be able to supplement that at that point. But yeah, you're right, because only bringing in Nesta last year makes you kind of feel a little weary about the rotations and stuff coming next season. I think that Christian Jones would be a major component to add him with Marcus James, because it gives you those 2 really big linebackers. But I could totally see us really going heavy on linebacker in 2026, because we would have to if we don't land this player.
And that's something we've seen them do in their first few recruiting cycles. When there's a position group, there's definite strength in a recruiting cycle, whether it's, you know, the 2022 class there was a lot of really, really good linebackers in that class. You know, you go to 2024 and it was defensive line. We're seeing in 2025, they're really putting an emphasis on offensive line recruiting with a deep offensive line group in this cycle. Maybe it's just one of those positions where it's like, okay, they see further out in 2026 that there's a much greater depth at that position, and are going to look to go a little bit heavier that year as opposed to maybe this year. And then, like you said, just take 2. Maybe they go back to getting 3 or 4 in future cycles, but we'll see how it goes. Again, hey, who am I to sit here and question Brent Venables, Zach Alley, and this defensive staff? They've done nothing but recruit their tail off since arriving in Norman in December of 2021. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Again, tune in every day it's your first listen. Shout out to all the everydayers here on Locked On Sooners. Follow Jay on Twitter at Unfair Sports, myself at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you do your socials. It's at Locked On Sooners. But until next time, he's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams. Boomer.
Sooner.